On a cold, dark night, a 7-year-old boy knocked on the door of a wealthy billionaire's mansion, asking for a piece of bread. When the billionaire opened the door, he was stunned, terrified even, to discover the boy's true identity. Caleb was 7 years old, but he looked younger. His body was thin, his knees scraped, and his worn-out shoes dangled loosely from his feet as if they belonged to someone else. He wandered alone through the streets of Zapopan, carefully stepping around puddles, eyes fixed on the ground. That afternoon, he hadn't eaten a thing. In fact, for the past 2 days, he'd survived on crumbs and leftovers he'd found while rummaging through garbage cans. Ever since escaping from the orphanage, his life had become a never-ending game of hide and seek, always trying to avoid attention. He slept in parks, under bridges, or wherever the night felt slightly less cold. But tonight, the wind blew so fiercely that Caleb wasn't sure he'd survive another one. That's when he spotted it. A large white house with a polished black gate and security cameras everywhere. It looked like a castle, but one without lights, laughter, or warmth. Caleb moved closer carefully. He felt afraid, but his hunger was even stronger. With trembling fingers, he reached out and pressed the doorbell. He waited, hearing nothing but silence from inside. Inside the mansion, Harrison Ford sat at his desk, staring at an open folder he had no interest in reading. The clock on the wall showed exactly 5 o'clock, but in this house, time had stopped mattering 2 years ago. Ever since Nathan, his son, had died in an accident, Harrison's days had blended into an endless loop of paperwork, silence, and loneliness. He was a respected businessman who ran a successful tech company, accustomed to giving orders, but deep down he was just a heartbroken father. He hardly ever left his home, rarely talked to anyone. Margaret was the only person who remained at the house, a woman who had worked with his family for decades. When the doorbell rang, Harrison frowned. Nobody rang that bell anymore. He stood up and pulled the curtain aside slightly, glancing out. There, on the street, stood a small, dirty child. Thin, scruffy, with dirt covering his face, and remarkably bright green eyes. He looked like a shadow seeking shelter. "What the hell?" Harrison mumbled to himself. He didn't open the door. Margaret, already walking towards the entrance, did. She always sensed when something wasn't quite right. "What do you want, kid?" Margaret asked sternly, folding her arms across her chest. "I'm hungry, ma'am. Just some bread, please," Caleb answered without lifting his head, eyes fixed on the ground. Margaret looked at him closely. He was missing one shoe, his lip was split, and he carried the unmistakable scent of life on the streets. She sighed, ready to send him away. But something about this boy stopped her. Maybe it was his eyes, or perhaps it was how he asked without begging, as if he already expected rejection. Margaret went inside, took a stale loaf of bread from the kitchen, and returned. "Here, take this, but don't come back, understand?" Caleb nodded, sat down on the curb, and slowly ate the bread as though it might be the last food he'd see for a long time. Margaret watched him silently from the doorway before returning inside. Harrison watched the scene from his window, fists tightly clenched. Later, he told Margaret in a harsh tone, "I don't want any kids around my house." "He didn't come inside. He just sat outside to eat," she replied. "I don't care. Make sure he doesn't come back." But the next morning, when Harrison walked downstairs holding his cup of coffee, there he was again, sitting quietly in the same spot, same green eyes staring silently at the house. This time, he didn't ring the bell. He just sat, waiting. Margaret spotted him from the kitchen window. Caleb was back, sitting cross-legged on the curb, arms resting on his knees. He didn't ask for food or ring the bell. He simply looked at the house as if it were speaking to him somehow. Margaret sighed deeply, wiped her hands on her apron, and slowly walked outside. Leaning against the gate, she called out, "You again?" Caleb lowered his head without looking up, as though he already recognized the weary voice. "I'm not here to ask for bread this time," he said quietly. "Then why come here?" "Because it's peaceful. No yelling, no dogs barking, and it smells good when you cook." Margaret didn't respond right away. She stared at him closely. He wore the same torn sweater from yesterday, yet his expression appeared calmer, almost as if merely sitting near the house brought him some comfort. Something stirred inside Margaret, but she forced herself to keep her voice steady. "Caleb, you can't come here every day. This isn't your house." "I know," he whispered softly. "I just wanted to sit for a little while." Margaret hesitated. Then she returned to the kitchen, prepared a roll filled with beans, poured a glass of water, and brought it out. "Here, but promise me you'll leave afterward." Caleb held the bread with both hands, eyes silently expressing gratitude. He ate slowly, savoring every bite. Margaret watched him without saying a word. Something about the boy deeply moved her. Not just his obvious sadness, but something about his face, his presence. Harrison was passing through the hallway when he heard voices coming from the entrance. Irritated, he pulled aside the curtain again. Seeing the boy once more, he scowled angrily, rushed downstairs without speaking, and swung open the door forcefully. "What are you doing here again? Didn't I tell you I didn't want you near this place?" Caleb quickly stood up, eyes wide with sudden fear. He didn't run away, but he didn't defend himself either. "I'm leaving now, sir." "Good. I hope so." Margaret quickly stepped forward before Harrison slammed the door shut. "Harrison, take it easy. He was just sitting outside. He didn't cause any trouble." Harrison shook his head impatiently. "Margaret, this house isn't a shelter. If we allow him to stay, tomorrow there'll be others." "But this boy has no one," she insisted. "So what should I do? Adopt him?" A tense silence fell between them, heavier than Harrison's words. By now, Caleb had already started to slowly walk away. Margaret watched him until he disappeared around the corner. She turned back to Harrison and said quietly, "I'm not saying adopt him, but you don't need to treat him like garbage either." Harrison closed the door without another word. Later that night, as Margaret cleaned up the kitchen, she couldn't stop thinking about the boy. She thought about Lucia, Harrison's wife, who had vanished years ago. She remembered Lucia's eyes filled with tears, remembered her saying something about starting over somewhere new, and how no one had heard from her again. Margaret took out a wooden box she kept hidden on the top shelf. Inside were old photographs, letters, and faded receipts. She searched carefully for one photo in particular. When she finally found it, her breath caught in her chest. Lucia smiling warmly with Nathan in her arms. But what truly shook her were the eyes. Those same green eyes she'd seen earlier in the boy on the curb. It seemed impossible, yet she couldn't just dismiss it. Something from this family's past was returning, and it had taken the shape of a 7-year-old boy, hungry and quiet, searching for something he couldn't name. Early the next morning, Margaret got up before sunrise. She couldn't stop staring at that photograph. She'd placed it carefully on the kitchen table and tried convincing herself it was just a coincidence. But the resemblance was too striking. Caleb had Lucia's eyes. Margaret poured herself coffee, and, without giving it much thought, slipped the photo into the pocket of her apron. She knew Harrison wouldn't react well without proof, but a feeling inside kept telling her this wasn't a crazy thought. At exactly 7, as if he'd done this his entire life, Caleb appeared again outside the house. This time, he didn't sit down. He stood, hesitating in front of the gate, unsure whether to ring the bell or not. Margaret stepped out before he could decide. "You're here again," she said softly, crossing her arms without scolding him. Caleb nodded quietly. "Did you sleep at the same place?" she asked. "Yeah, but it rained last night, so I got wet." Margaret sighed and led him into the backyard. She handed him a towel to dry off and prepared some bread with warm milk. Caleb ate carefully, quietly savoring every bite as if he knew it could be his last meal for a while. Margaret sat down opposite him and asked gently, "Can I ask you something?" He nodded, still chewing. "Do you remember your mom?" Caleb lowered his eyes and stayed quiet for a moment before replying, "No, I never saw her. At the orphanage, they told me I was left there when I was a baby. Nobody knew who she was, only that she was a woman. You don't have anything, papers, or a name? Margaret asked. No, just this. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn and handled many times. Margaret took it carefully. It was a drawing done with colored pencils, a woman with long hair, wearing a dress, holding a baby gently. It was clearly drawn by a child, yet something about it felt oddly familiar. Did you draw this yourself? Yes. Sometimes I see her in dreams. I think that's my mom. Margaret shivered slightly. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the woman in the drawing reminded her of Lucia. She gently folded the drawing again and handed it back. Thank you for trusting me, Caleb. He smiled slightly. It was the first time she'd seen him smile since meeting him. Later that day, Margaret climbed to the attic where old documents from the Ford family were stored. She searched through piles for hours until she found a file containing Lucia's old papers. Among them was a wrinkled receipt from a doctor's visit, dated exactly 7 years ago from Guadalajara General Hospital. Margaret's heart raced. Suddenly, she recalled something Lucia had said shortly before disappearing. I'm tired, Margaret. I need to leave. I need a fresh start. Alone. At the time, Margaret had thought Lucia meant her marriage, Harrison, or the life she had. But now she wondered. Could Lucia have been referring to another pregnancy? Had Lucia had another child and hidden it? Could that child be Caleb? The possibility no longer seemed far-fetched. If true, Harrison hadn't only lost a son, he still had one, alive, sleeping out in the garden. Margaret couldn't concentrate for the rest of the day. Her head spun with thoughts. The hospital receipt, the child's drawing, those unmistakable green eyes, Lucia's strange words before disappearing. Everything fit too neatly to be just a coincidence. But she didn't yet have solid proof. That afternoon, when Harrison came out of his office to get some coffee, Margaret stopped him in the kitchen. She hesitated briefly, then finally spoke up. Do you remember the hospital Lucia visited before she left? The General Hospital in Guadalajara. It was just before she disappeared. Harrison looked at Margaret with a puzzled expression. No, why are you asking me that? Because I found a receipt for a medical appointment from 7 years ago. It was mixed in with her things, and I have a feeling it wasn't just a regular checkup. Maybe it was something more significant. Something she never told you about. Harrison tensed up immediately. Margaret, if you have something to say it clearly. What if Lucia was pregnant when she left? Harrison abruptly set down his coffee cup. What are you talking about? Listen to me, please. That boy who keeps coming here, Caleb, he's exactly the right age. He was left at an orphanage without any record of his father. He has Nathan's eyes, Lucia's eyes. Margaret, that's ridiculous, Harrison scoffed. But what if it's not? Harrison shook his head. He walked over to the front door and swung it open roughly. Caleb was sitting on the steps outside, drawing quietly on a folded piece of paper with a worn pencil. He looked up when he sensed Harrison's presence. You again? Harrison growled. Don't you have anywhere else to go? Caleb lowered his head. Sorry, I didn't mean to bother you. Margaret quickly came outside and knelt beside him. Santi, can I ask you something? Yes, he replied, keeping his eyes fixed on the ground. Does the name Lucia mean anything to you? Caleb looked up, confused. Sometimes I hear that name in my dreams. A woman calls to me, and she says something like, Lucia wouldn't do that. I don't understand it. Harrison swallowed hard. Do you remember anything from when you were little? A place, someone's face? Only a voice, Caleb replied softly. And a song, a lullaby, always the same. I don't know who sings it, but I always hear it in my head. Margaret and Harrison exchanged a troubled look. There were many unanswered questions. Too many. That night, Margaret made up her mind. She drove straight to Guadalajara General Hospital, holding the faded receipt tightly. Years ago, she'd worked there briefly and still knew Marta, a trusted nurse who handled medical records. Marta, I really need a favor, she pleaded. Marta hesitated at first, but eventually agreed to help. They searched through the digital files, then older paper records. Finally, Marta pointed to a faded yellow sheet of paper. "Here it is," Marta whispered. Lucia Barragan, admitted on July 12th. Emergency childbirth, alone, no visitors. "What about the baby?" Margaret asked, her voice shaking. "A boy, unnamed, no documentation. The mother died during delivery." Margaret felt her chest tighten painfully. She had feared this, but hearing it confirmed was devastating. "What happened to the baby?" Child Protective Services took him. They placed him in Luz Nueva Orphanage, listed as anonymous. Caleb. There was no doubt left in Margaret's mind. Margaret left the hospital shaking, her heart racing. She now knew for certain. The little boy sleeping outside their home wasn't just a ghost from the past. He was Harrison's son, the son he never knew existed. Margaret didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her bed holding the documents, replaying every detail in her mind. The hospital receipt, the orphanage records, the dates, the names, everything matched. But the hardest part was realizing she'd been so close to the truth for years and never saw it. As dawn broke, Margaret went downstairs to the kitchen and began boiling water for coffee. She had to talk to Harrison, and she knew it wouldn't be easy. When she heard his heavy footsteps descending the stairs, she took a deep breath and steadied herself. Harrison walked in as usual, silent, tense, and withdrawn. He grabbed his coffee without looking at Margaret. "We need to talk," she said directly. "If it's about that kid again, you know exactly how I feel," Harrison snapped. "Well, I'll say it again, because this isn't just a hunch anymore. I have proof." Harrison glanced at her, his eyebrows knitted in frustration. "Proof of what?" Margaret placed the hospital receipt and orphanage record on the table in front of him. Lucia was admitted to the General Hospital 7 years ago. She had a baby boy and died shortly afterward. The baby was sent to Luz Nueva Orphanage. There was no name registered for the father, no paperwork left behind. "That doesn't prove it's Caleb," Harrison responded coldly. "No, not by itself, but Caleb's age matches exactly. He never knew his parents. He was left with only a drawing. He has Nathan's eyes, Lucia's eyes, and he dreams about a woman singing a lullaby, the very same one Lucia always sang." Harrison went quiet. His hand shook slightly, though he tried to hide it. "What exactly do you want me to do?" "A DNA test," Margaret said bluntly. "Just one test. If he's not your son, I'll never mention it again. But if he is, you can't just ignore him." Harrison pressed his lips together, rubbing his forehead anxiously. Inside, he felt something breaking apart. He glanced out the window and saw Caleb sitting quietly beneath a tree, drawing shapes in the dirt with a small stick. "Make the appointment," Harrison finally said. That same afternoon, Margaret took Caleb to a private clinic. Harrison went with them, though he didn't say a single word the entire drive. Caleb sat quietly in the back seat, eyes fixed on the window, curious but silent. He didn't ask any questions. When they arrived, a nurse led them into a small, well-lit room. She explained the procedure, just a simple saliva swab. Caleb didn't complain. He didn't really understand what the test was for, but he trusted Margaret. "Is this to check if I'm sick?" he asked softly. "No, sweetheart," Margaret said, gently brushing his hair back. "It's to help us understand where you come from." 3 days later, Margaret got the call. The envelope with the results was ready. She picked it up, brought it home, and placed it on Harrison's desk without saying a word. He stared at it like it weighed 100 pounds. With tense hands, he sat down, opened it, and read. Genetic match, 99. 98%. Caleb was his son. The paper slipped from his fingers. He didn't move, just sat there, frozen, while years of pain, regret, and unanswered questions hit him all at once. Lucia had left without telling him anything, and now her child, his child, had been right outside his door, asking for nothing but a moment of kindness. Harrison didn't speak for the rest of the day. He skipped dinner. He locked himself in his study, sitting in the dark, staring out the window like he was waiting for a sign that never came. The test results sat open on the desk. He didn't touch them again. Caleb, unaware of all of it, slept on a makeshift mat in the back room, wrapped in a blanket Margaret had taken from the guest room. He didn't ask questions. He never really did. He had long since learned to accept what was given without expecting explanations. Later that night, Margaret brought a cup of tea upstairs, but Harrison didn't open the door. "You know now," she said quietly through the wood. "You can't ignore it. That boy is your son, whether you were ready for him or not, whether you wanted him or not." Silence. "You weren't to blame for what Lucia did, but you do have a choice now, not to repeat the same story. Do something before it's too late." She walked away slowly, heart heavy. She knew Harrison needed time. He always had. But Caleb didn't have the luxury of waiting. The next morning, Caleb was up early, like always. He stretched, stood up, and walked straight to the kitchen. Margaret was already there, brewing coffee and making tortillas. "Can I help with something?" he asked in a quiet voice. "Of course," she smiled. "Grab the butter. It's in the fridge door." They worked side by side for a while, not saying much. Margaret felt her throat tighten as she watched him move so naturally in a house he didn't even know he belonged to. "Santi," she said gently, "would you like to stay here? Not just for a few days, but for real?" The boy looked at her, surprised. "Here? With you guys?" "Yes." "What about the man? He doesn't really like me." Margaret knelt down beside him, brushing the hair from his forehead. "He's confused, but deep down, I think he wants you here too. He just needs time to see it clearly." Caleb nodded slowly, still unsure. "I'd like to stay. I just don't want to be a bother." "You're not a bother, Santi. You're part of this story, even if you don't know it yet." Harrison came downstairs around noon, his face worn, his eyes even more tired than usual. He walked past the kitchen and saw Caleb drying dishes while Margaret stacked them away. He didn't say a word. He just watched for a moment, then headed back to his study. Once inside, he opened the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out a small wooden box, the one where he kept Nathan's things. Old photos, tiny toys, an unsent letter, childhood drawings. He picked one up, a sketch of a house with trees and a small figure sitting beneath one. It looked almost exactly like one of Caleb's. Harrison felt a hollow ache in his chest, the same stillness in the lines, the same quiet loneliness. Caleb wasn't Nathan. No one ever would be. But Caleb had grown up alone too, forgotten by the world. And Harrison, he could keep running, or he could choose a different path this time. He let out a long breath, stood up, took the DNA results in hand, and stepped out of the study. It was time to speak. Not as a businessman, not as a widower, but as a father. He walked down the hallway, his steps heavier than usual. In the kitchen, Margaret and Caleb were still chatting softly as they cleaned up, talking about the weather, a dream Caleb had, what they'd eat later. Harrison stopped in the doorway and watched them. Caleb was laughing quietly, trying to catch a glass that nearly slipped from his wet hands. Margaret gave him instructions like a grandma would, natural, warm, without even thinking about it. Harrison cleared his throat. They both turned around at the same time. "Caleb," Harrison said firmly, arms crossed, "can we talk for a minute?" The boy froze where he was. Margaret gave him a gentle look and nodded, encouraging him. Caleb wiped his hands on his shirt and quietly followed Harrison into the living room. Harrison sat upright on the couch. Caleb chose the far end, sitting up straight, his legs not quite reaching the floor. For a few seconds, neither of them said anything. "Do you know who I am?" Harrison finally asked. Caleb nodded. "You're the owner of the house, the father of the boy who's not here anymore. Nathan." The name hit Harrison like a punch to the chest, but he kept going. "Do you know anything about your parents?" "No. At the orphanage, they told me my mom left. And about my dad, they never said anything. Just that someone dropped me off when I was a baby." Harrison studied him. The boy didn't sound angry, just calm in a way that hurt more than yelling would have. "A few days ago you took a test. Do you remember?" "Yeah. Margaret said it was to find something important. Well, the results came back. They were very positive." Caleb frowned, trying to make sense of it. "What does that mean?" Harrison leaned in, lowering his voice. "It means you and I share the same blood. It means I'm your father." The silence that followed felt heavy. Caleb didn't say a word. He just stared at Harrison, not blinking. "I didn't know you existed," Harrison continued. "Your mom, Lucia, she left without telling me she was pregnant. I just found out recently. That's why I'm telling you now." Caleb looked down at his hands, fidgeting with his fingers. His mind was spinning. "So, you're my dad?" "Yes." "Then, why didn't you ever come for me?" It felt like the boy had thrown a stone straight into Harrison's chest. "Because I didn't know you were out there. If I had, I swear I would have looked for you." Caleb nodded slowly. He didn't cry. He didn't run into Harrison's arms. He just took it all in, like someone filing away something deep inside to deal with later. "What happens now?" he asked. "That's up to you," Harrison said. "You can stay here if you want. This can be your home. And if I don't want to, then I'll help you find another place. I won't force you into anything, but I'd really like to get to know you, if you'll let me." Caleb looked up at him again. His eyes, those same green eyes as Lucia's, held a weight beyond his years. "No one's ever asked me what I wanted." Harrison smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's time we start." Caleb didn't say anything, but he didn't get up either. That, to Harrison, was already something. The next few days passed quietly. Caleb no longer slept outside, but he still didn't take a room of his own. Margaret had made up a cozy corner in the guest room for him, with clean sheets and a lamp he could turn off whenever he wanted. He didn't ask for much. He didn't expect anything. He just accepted the kindness like someone who wasn't used to receiving it. Harrison, on his end, struggled to find a way in. It had been years since a child had lived in his home, and the grief from losing Nathan still weighed on him like a stone he couldn't put down. One afternoon, he found Caleb in the garden, sitting cross-legged on the grass with a sketchbook open. The boy was drawing, tongue sticking out a little, totally focused. "What are you working on?" Harrison asked, voice neutral. "A drawing," Caleb replied without looking up. "Can I see?" Caleb hesitated for a moment, then turned the notebook around. It was a picture of the house, a big tree next to it, and in the yard, two figures, a man and a boy, small but together. Harrison felt his throat tighten. "Who are they?" "I don't know," Caleb said. "I didn't plan it. They just showed up." Harrison sat beside him without a word. They stared at the drawing together. For once, it didn't feel awkward. "I'm not very good at this stuff," Harrison said out of nowhere. "Being a dad, being close to someone. I wasn't good at it with Nathan. I didn't know how." Caleb glanced sideways. "Was he like me?" "No. He was different, more outgoing. He loved cars, and he asked a million questions." "I don't ask much," Caleb said with a shrug. "I've noticed," Harrison replied, smiling a little. "It's just, when you ask, sometimes grown-ups get mad, or they lie." Harrison looked away. That one hit hard. "You're right. But it shouldn't be like that." That night, Margaret made a simple dinner. Chicken with rice and warm tortillas. She set 3 plates on the table. Out of habit, she was about to bring Harrison's plate up to his study, but this time she paused at the door. "Dinner's ready," she said. "You should come down." Harrison looked up from his desk. "Is he there?" "Yes." "And he's hungry. Don't make him eat alone." Harrison closed the file in front of him and slowly made his way down the stairs. Caleb was already at the table, hands resting on his lap. Harrison sat across from him without saying a word. Margaret served their plates and quietly slipped away with some excuse. They started eating in silence, the only sound coming from their silverware. "Do you like the chicken?" Harrison asked after a moment. "Yes," Caleb replied. "Margaret's a good cook, huh?" "She is." Another pause, shorter this time. "What else do you like, besides drawing?" Caleb thought for a second. "Listening to music, but the quiet kind, not the loud stuff." Harrison nodded. "Me too. Nathan and I used to listen to old records in the study." "Can I see them sometime?" Caleb asked. Harrison looked at him, a little surprised. "Of course, whenever you want." Caleb lowered his gaze like "whenever you want" was something he'd never been told before. But he smiled. Just a little. Enough to make Harrison feel, for the first time in years, that there might still be something worth building. Fragile, but real. The next morning, Caleb woke before dawn. He tiptoed down the hallway, careful not to make a sound, and stopped outside the study. The door was slightly open, and the soft light from the hallway revealed shelves stacked with records, books, old photos, and papers scattered around. He stepped in like he was entering sacred ground. Slowly, he approached the shelf, reading the names on the record spines. Chavela Vargas, Agustin Lara, Jose Alfredo Jimenez. Names he didn't know, but they felt important. He sat on the floor and carefully pulled out one of the vinyls. He didn't know how to play it, but he wanted to hear it. "That one was Nathan's favorite," came a voice behind him. Caleb jumped. Harrison was standing in the doorway, arms crossed. "Sorry, I didn't mean to touch anything," the boy said, nervous. "It's okay," Harrison replied gently. "This is your home." Harrison walked over, placed the record on the player, and lowered the needle. A soft, warm melody filled the air. "Who is it?" Caleb asked. "Agustin Lara," Harrison said. "Nathan liked him, said it reminded him of his mom." Caleb looked down. Harrison sat beside him on the floor. "Lucia, that was your mother's name," he said. "She was strong, stubborn, brave when she wanted to be." "Did she love me?" Caleb asked. Harrison didn't answer right away. The music floated gently between them, filling the silence with something words couldn't quite touch. "I don't know, son," he finally said. "She left without saying anything. Disappeared. I didn't even know she was pregnant, but I want to believe she did. That she loved you, even if she didn't know how to take care of you." Caleb gave a quiet nod. No tears. Just tucked the words away like they were something precious. "What about Nathan?" he asked carefully. "What was he like?" Harrison sighed and pulled out a small wooden box. He placed it between them and opened it, taking out a photo. "This is him. He was 10 here. We took it out in the garden." Caleb studied the picture. The boy in it was older, with dark hair and a big, bright smile. He looked happy. "Did he draw too?" "He did, and played a bit of guitar. He was curious, full of questions. Everything you're not. Is that bad?" "No, just different, but just as special." Caleb picked up another photo. Lucia, smiling softly, her hair down, eyes warm. "Why did she leave?" "I don't know," Harrison admitted. "I never understood. Maybe she was scared. Maybe she felt alone. Some questions I just can't answer." Caleb gently closed the box. "Can I keep a photo of her?" Harrison blinked, caught off guard. "Of course. Pick whichever you like." Caleb chose a small black and white photo where Lucia looked straight at the camera, her expression peaceful. He slipped it carefully into his pocket. "Thanks," he said. "You're welcome, Caleb." "Can I stay?" Harrison swallowed hard. "You can stay as long as you want. This is your home now." Caleb smiled, really smiled, shy and relieved, the way only a kid who's waited a long time for something knows how to do. And for the first time, Harrison didn't feel like a stranger in his own life. That night, while the house was quiet, Harrison sat in his study, staring up at the ceiling. The lights were off, except for a small desk lamp casting a soft glow over scattered papers. In front of him, the DNA results still lay open. He didn't need to reread them. He knew every word by heart. Caleb was his son, no doubt. But inside, the guilt still echoed. Guilt for not seeing the signs when Lucia started drifting away, for not looking harder, for shutting down his heart, even while Nathan was still alive. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, burying his face in his hands. He wanted to do right by Caleb, but he was scared. This wasn't just about giving the boy a roof over his head. It was about teaching him trust, making him feel safe, showing him he was loved. And Harrison wasn't sure he knew how to do that. The next morning, Caleb noticed something was different. They had breakfast together, like they had the past few days, but Harrison was quieter than usual, like his thoughts were heavier than ever. "Everything okay?" Caleb asked in a soft voice as he spread butter on his bread. "Yeah, I just didn't sleep much," Harrison replied. Caleb nodded and didn't press. He'd learned not to push grown-ups. Too many questions usually led to being told to hush. After breakfast, Harrison surprised him. "Want to go downtown? There's a nice bookstore. Maybe we can find you some sketch pads." Caleb looked at him with a mix of excitement and disbelief. "Really?" "Of course. And there's a park nearby. We could stop by there too." Caleb smiled. He wasn't used to adults inviting him anywhere, especially not just for him. They walked through the city center side by side. Harrison had his hands in his pockets, while Caleb looked around, taking in every detail like it was the first time he'd seen a world that cared. At the bookstore, Caleb's eyes lit up at the sight of all the colors, pencils, paper, supplies of every kind. "Can I pick one?" he asked. "You can pick two," Harrison said. Caleb carefully chose a thick sketchbook and a box of colored pencils. Then his eyes landed on something on a high shelf, a wooden hand model used for drawing. He didn't ask for it. He just stared at it for a long time. Without saying a word, Harrison picked it up and added it to their items. "That's going to," he said. "But that's expensive," Caleb whispered. "You're worth more than that," Harrison said without looking back. When they got home, Caleb rushed up to the guest room, eager to test his new supplies. Margaret watched them from the kitchen window with a quiet smile full of relief. She walked over to Harrison, who was pouring himself a glass of water. "You've changed," she said gently. "Me? How? You seem different. And him?" Harrison leaned on the counter. "He's starting to breathe again." Harrison sighed. "I still don't know if I'm doing this right." "No one ever really does," Margaret replied. "Being a parent isn't about having all the answers. It's about sticking around even when you don't." He nodded silently. Upstairs, Caleb was already sketching something new. And for the first time, instead of a single figure alone, there were two, a big one and a small one, walking side by side. Days passed, and a new rhythm started to settle in. Caleb would wake early, help Margaret around the house, and then spend hours drawing in his new sketchbook. Harrison kept his distance at first, but gradually he got closer. They still had quiet moments, but they no longer felt awkward. Those silences were starting to feel like trust. One afternoon, while Caleb was drawing on the terrace, he overheard a conversation coming from the kitchen. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but Harrison's voice caught his attention. It sounded softer, more unsure than usual. "Sometimes I wonder if I even deserve this, Margaret," he said. "After everything I did wrong with Nathan, after letting Lucia leave without fighting for her, now I have Caleb, and I don't know if I can be what he needs." "Harrison, this isn't about what you deserve," Margaret replied firmly. "It's about showing up. And you're showing up. That's already more than he's ever had. If one day he feels like you're not enough, at least it won't be because you ignored him. It'll be because you gave him everything you had." Caleb felt a lump rise in his throat. He didn't understand every word, but he understood the feeling. Harrison was talking about him, He was doubting himself. And for the first time, Caleb wondered if maybe he'd expected too much. That night at dinner, he was unusually quiet. He barely touched his beans, just moved them around with his fork. Harrison noticed, but didn't push. "Everything okay, son?" he asked gently. "Yeah," Caleb answered, lifting his head. "Just tired." "You sure?" "Yeah." Margaret studied him. She knew he'd heard something. After dinner, Caleb went upstairs. Harrison was washing the dishes when Margaret stepped beside him. "I think he heard what you said earlier," she murmured. Harrison paused mid-scrub. "You think—" "I do, and I think you need to talk to him. Tonight." He dried his hands and headed up the stairs slowly. He knocked lightly. "Can I come in?" "Yes," Caleb said from the bed. Harrison walked in. Caleb had his sketchbook in his lap, but he wasn't drawing, just staring at the blank page. "Something bothering you?" Harrison asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Caleb took a while to answer. "I heard you. In the kitchen." Harrison nodded. He didn't try to deny it. "I didn't mean for you to hear that. You said you weren't sure if you deserved to be with me." Harrison closed his eyes briefly. "I said that because I'm scared. I've made so many mistakes. I just don't want to mess this up too." Caleb looked down. "I'm scared too," he whispered. "I'm always scared people will leave me again." Harrison felt like his heart had just cracked wide open. "I'm not going anywhere, Caleb. Even if I mess up, even if I don't always get it right, I'm here. I'm not leaving you." Caleb looked up, his green eyes glassy with unshed tears. "Promise?" "I promise." And for the first time, Caleb threw his arms around him and held on tightly, like his whole world depended on that hug. And in that moment, Harrison understood something deeply. He couldn't change the past, but the present was still his to shape. And he had made his choice. He was staying. From that night on, something shifted between Harrison and Caleb. They weren't just a man and a boy living under the same roof anymore. There was a bond forming, still fragile, still growing, but real. A quiet promise had taken root and started to show up in the little things. Harrison became more involved. He'd ask Caleb what he wanted for breakfast, help him sort through his drawings, even go on walks with him around the neighborhood. He wasn't perfect. Sometimes he got too quiet. Sometimes his words came out awkward. But Caleb had stopped taking it personally. He was learning that love didn't always come wrapped in big words. Sometimes it just meant showing up. One afternoon, Harrison took him to a stationery shop downtown. "What are we looking for?" Caleb asked. "A frame," Harrison said, not looking up. "For one of your drawings. I want to hang it in my office." Caleb's eyes widened. "Really?" "Of course. I like that one you did of the two of us walking by the tree." Caleb gave a shy smile, but his chest filled with joy. When they returned home, Margaret was waiting in the kitchen with freshly baked sweetbread. Smells like a party in here," Caleb said, walking in. "It's pan dulce. I thought we could celebrate a little," she replied. "Celebrate what?" "That this house finally feels alive again." Harrison glanced at her and gave a quiet, grateful look. He didn't need to say a word. During the snack, Caleb couldn't stop smiling. Sitting between Margaret and Harrison, with warm bread in one hand and a glass of milk in the other, he felt something he hadn't in a long time, like he truly belonged. He wasn't just a guest. He wasn't just a kid from the street. He was Caleb, Lucia's son, Harrison's son. That night, Harrison went up to the attic. It had been years since he'd stepped foot there. In a dusty corner, he found an old box filled with Nathan's things, small toys, notebooks, sketches. He opened it slowly, bracing himself for the flood of memories. Among them was a small, worn-out soccer ball. The next day, he quietly placed it on Caleb's bed without saying a word. Caleb found it after his homeschool lesson with Margaret. He stared at it for a moment, then ran downstairs. "Is this for me?" "It was your brother's," Harrison said. "He used to play with it in the yard. Thought maybe you'd like it too." Caleb held the ball like it was made of gold. "Do you think he would have liked me?" "I'm sure he would have," Harrison said without hesitation. "And I think I would have liked having 2 sons." Harrison knelt down and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "And I think Nathan would be happy to know you're not alone anymore." That night, before bed, Caleb opened his sketchbook to the last page and started a new drawing. This time, there weren't just 2 figures. There were 3, a woman with loose hair, a calm-faced man, and a boy hugging a ball, all of them beneath a tree, together, finally. The weekend brought a soft sun and a clear sky. Margaret made a special breakfast, scrambled eggs with ham, toast, and fresh squeezed orange juice. Caleb came downstairs with his sketchbook in hand like always, but today he didn't sit down to draw right away. He looked a little unsettled. "Did you sleep okay?" Margaret asked, pouring his juice. "Yeah, but—" He paused. "I dreamed about her." "Who?" "My mom, Lucia." Harrison had just walked into the kitchen and froze when he heard the name. Caleb noticed, then continued gently. "In the dream, she was looking at me through a window. She didn't say anything, just stared, kind of sad, like she wanted to speak but couldn't." Margaret slowly set her spoon down on the table. "And what did you do?" "I smiled at her, told her I was okay, that I was being taken care of here." The kitchen fell into a quiet stillness. No one spoke. They didn't have to. Later that day, Harrison stepped into the backyard with a small shovel and a potted sapling he'd picked up from the nursery the week before. Caleb followed, curious. "What are you doing?" "We're planting this tree. The guy at the store said it's strong, grows fast, and gives good shade." "Here?" "Yep, wherever you want." Caleb looked around thoughtfully, walking the yard with purpose. He stopped by a sunny corner near the wall. "Here, I like this spot." Harrison dug the first hole, then handed the shovel to Caleb. "Your turn." Caleb let out a quiet laugh. He wasn't used to being part of decisions like this. He dug with excitement, even though the ground was hard and his arms got tired quickly. "We'll take care of it together," Harrison said as they gently lowered the tree into place, "so it can grow strong." "Can I name it?" Caleb asked. "Of course," Harrison replied. Caleb thought for a moment. "I'm going to name it Nathan." Harrison went quiet. His jaw clenched slightly, but he didn't argue. "That's a good name," he said, his voice a little rough. That night, while Caleb was in the shower, Harrison walked up to his office. He opened his laptop and began to type, not work emails or reports, but a letter. A letter to Caleb. One he wasn't sure he'd ever give him, but one he needed to write. "Son, I don't know if I deserve to be called that. I've made a lot of mistakes. I was a distant husband, a scared father, and a man who lived locked inside his own pain. But since you came, something started to shift. You make me want to try again. You make me believe maybe it's not too late. Thank you for not letting go of my hand, even when I didn't know how to hold yours." He saved the file but didn't print it. He'd know when the time was right. Later, in his pajamas, Caleb walked into the office like he did every night to say goodnight. "How's the tree?" he asked. "I already watered it," Harrison said with a smile. "It's in good hands. It's gonna grow big, right? Just like you." Caleb gave him a short but strong hug, then walked out without another word. Harrison stayed in his chair, staring at the doorway. He wasn't perfect. He couldn't fix the past. But something was growing now, and for the first time in years, it wasn't pain. It was hope. The morning sun filtered softly into the office, the kind of light that hadn't touched the room in a long time. Harrison stood at a shelf, carefully rearranging picture frames. He removed some old, dusty ones and made space at the center for something new. With steady hands, he placed it. It was a drawing by Caleb, a house, a tree, and 3 figures. A man, a boy, and a woman with long hair smiling from a cloud above. At the bottom, written in wobbly but clear letters, were the words, "My family." To one side was the familiar photo of Nathan, full of life, smiling wide. On the other, a black and white picture of Lucia, hair loose, looking just the way they remembered. And right in the middle, Caleb's drawing. Harrison stepped back and took it all in. He didn't feel like a stranger among those faces anymore. He wasn't running from the past or hiding from the present. Outside, Caleb was playing soccer in the yard, pausing now and then to glance at his tree, which had started to sprout strong green leaves. Margaret stood at the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "Santi, your dad's waiting to go out." "Coming," Caleb shouted, grinning as he ran toward the house with the ball tucked under his arm. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time and burst into the office where Harrison waited, car keys in hand. "Ready?" "Yeah." "Want to hit the park?" "Let's go. And if you behave, we might stop for some ice cream after." "Vanilla? Anything you want." Before they walked out, Caleb stopped at the shelf. He reached out and gently touched the corner of his drawing. "Can I make another one?" "A new one?" "Yeah. We'll hang it right next to this one." Caleb looked up at him proudly, not for the drawing, but for the promise that had been kept. Harrison ruffled his hair, and together, they stepped out the door. They didn't need fancy words, or perfect answers, or healed scars. Just to walk, side by side. Because in the end, that's what family is. Staying, even when things have been hard. And they were doing just that. Day by day, root by root. Not with certainty, but with love. This story is a deeply moving journey of redemption, quiet healing, and the power of second chances. What makes it especially impactful is how gently it unfolds. Not through grand gestures, but through small, everyday actions that slowly rebuild broken trust. At the center is Harrison, a man paralyzed by past regrets, and Caleb, a child who has known abandonment more intimately than affection. Neither of them is looking for salvation, yet somehow they find it in each other. Harrison's transformation is subtle but profound. At first, he's closed off, unsure how to connect, carrying the weight of losing his wife and son. But with time, through vulnerability and presence, he begins to rebuild his sense of purpose, not as a businessman or a grieving father, but as someone who dares to love again. Caleb's journey is equally touching. He enters the story as a quiet boy used to rejection and ends up finding a home, not just a roof over his head, but a place where he's wanted, seen, and valued. One of the most powerful moments is when Harrison plants a tree with Caleb and lets him name it Nathan. That gesture holds layers of healing, honoring a son lost while embracing a son found. Through these symbolic acts, the story shows us that love isn't perfect or loud. It's patient. It's showing up. It's letting someone stay when you have every reason to shut the door. The core message is clear. No matter how broken we feel, love can still take root. Family isn't just blood or history. It's the choice to stay, to grow, and to forgive. This story reminds us that we're never too late to love and never too lost to be found. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it. Leave a comment to tell us how it inspired you. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. May God bless you and be with you every step of the way.